I lay frozen behind the thin curtain, the sharp scent of antiseptic stinging my nose. Yet, what truly made me nauseous was hearing my husband's voice in the next bed, doting on my cousin. When the nurse asked if he was the father, and I caught Tiana's smirk through the gap, I knew my 10-year marriage was dead. They mistook me for a harmless housewife, forgetting that this hospital and the pharmaceutical empire he ran actually belonged to me. My name is Mallory Vance. But in that moment, I felt like a ghost haunting the emergency room of St. Jude Private Hospital in Seattle. The sharp chemical stench of antiseptic was overwhelming, stinging the back of my throat and mixing with the metallic smell of blood. I sat perfectly still on the stiff paper sheet covering the examination bed, my left hand throbbing where I had sliced it open earlier while chopping vegetables. The doctor had stitched me up and left me behind the privacy curtain to wait for discharge papers. I was supposed to be waiting for my husband, Gavin, who had gone to park the car. Then I heard the curtain to my right rustle. Familiar voices drifted through the fabric partition. It hurts. Gavin, it really hurts. A female voice whimpered. It was Tiana, my cousin. The cousin I had welcomed into my home and treated like a younger sister. I know, honey. Just breathe. Gavin's voice replied. It was dripping with a tenderness I had not heard directed at me in years. The doctor is coming soon. I'm right here. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Gavin was supposed to be looking for me. Instead, he was 2 feet away, unaware that only a thin sheet of polyester separated him from his wife. I leaned forward, peering through a small gap where the curtains did not quite meet. I saw Gavin clutching Tiana's hand, rubbing his thumb over her knuckles in a soothing rhythm. "We can't keep doing this," Tiana whispered, her voice trembling. "Mallory, she's going to find out eventually." "Let her find out," Gavin scoffed, his tone shifting from gentle to dismissive. "Once the merger goes through, I'm filing the papers. We will get that house in the Highlands, just like we planned. You just focus on staying healthy." "Okay." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The merger, the house. It was all calculated. Before I could process the magnitude of this betrayal, the brisk squeak of rubber shoes on linoleum announced the arrival of a nurse. "All right, let's check these vitals," the nurse said efficiently. I heard the Velcro tear of a blood pressure cuff. Blood pressure is a little elevated, which is normal given the cramping. "Now, just for our records regarding the pregnancy, is the father present?" The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I gripped the edge of my mattress, my knuckles turning white. "Yes," Gavin said, his voice swelling with pride. "I am the father." Through the gap, I saw Tiana look up at him. She did not look guilty. She smiled. It was a slow, curling smile of absolute victory. It was the smile of a woman who knew she had won the prize. I expected to cry. I expected to scream and tear down the curtain, but instead, a terrifying coldness washed over me. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips, numbing the throbbing pain in my hand. For 10 years, Gavin had made me feel broken. "You are so dry, Mallory." He used to tell me with a sneer when I failed to get pregnant month after month. "You are just cold. Maybe that is why nature won't give us a child. It's like living with a stone." I had taken all the tests. I had taken the hormones. I had hated myself for my own body. And all this time, he was the one planting seeds in another garden. I waited until the nurse left their cubicle and they were distracted by each other, quietly, moving with the precision of a thief. I slipped off the bed. I grabbed a piece of scrap paper from the side table and scribbled a quick note with my good hand. "Headache got too bad. Took a cab home. Don't worry about me." I left the note on my pillow and slipped out the side exit of the emergency room, bypassing the reception desk entirely. The cool Seattle air hit my face, but it did not make me shiver. I hailed a taxi and slid into the back seat. Where to, the driver asked. Downtown, I said softly. As the city lights blurred past the window, I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked tired. I looked worn down. I had spent a decade shrinking myself so Gavin could feel big. I had let him run Orinex Bio, the company my grandfather built, because he claimed he needed to feel like the man of the house. I had made myself small and harmless and stupid in his eyes. They thought I was just a housewife. They forgot that my name was Blackwood before it was Vance. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over the contacts until I found a number I had not dialed in 5 years. It rang twice before a deep, professional voice answered. Hello, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice steady and devoid of any tremor. This is Mallory Blackwood. We need to talk about the family trust. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the sprawling living room of our penthouse. It was a space that magazines loved to photograph, filled with Italian leather, cold chrome, and abstract art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. It was Gavin's dream house, not mine. To me, it felt like a museum where nothing could be touched, devoid of warmth or memories. I walked across the marble floor, the clicking of my heels echoing against the high ceilings, and sat on the edge of the white sofa to wait. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the front door finally unlocked. Gavin stumbled in, loosening his tie with a theatrical sigh of exhaustion. He smelled faintly of the same antiseptic soap I had smelled at St. Jude Hospital, but he looked at me with the practiced face of a martyr. I am so sorry, Mal, he said, dropping his briefcase on the floor. Emergency board meeting at Orinex Bio. The FDA compliance report is a disaster. I have been putting out fires all night. A day ago, I would have rushed to get him a glass of scotch, massaging his shoulders while murmuring words of comfort. Today, I just watched him. That sounds terrible, I said, my voice steady. Did you manage to fix it? He waved his hand dismissively. I always do. But God, I am exhausted. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his expression soured. I was wearing an old, oversized cardigan and pajama pants. Mallory, look at you. You look uninspired. Tiana was wearing this incredible silk dress the other day. She always makes an effort, you know. It wouldn't kill you to try a little harder for me. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I will keep that in mind, I replied softly. He did not know who he was talking to. He had forgotten. He saw a dowdy housewife, but he was looking at the sole heiress of the Blackwood dynasty. My grandfather founded Orinex Bio. I possessed the controlling shares, the legacy, and the bloodline. 10 years ago, when we married. I stepped into the shadows because Gavin claimed he needed to feel like the provider. He wanted the title of CEO. He hungered for the fame. I gave it to him because I loved him, thinking we were a team. I walked into his study after he passed out in the bedroom. I opened the financial ledgers he thought were too complex for my simple mind to understand. The numbers were bleeding red. For years. He had drained company funds for his supercars, his yacht trips, and his ego, and for years, I had quietly transferred money from my personal trust fund to cover his failures, preserving his reputation as a business genius. I remembered last week when Tiana had come over for dinner. She had walked out of the guest bathroom wearing my limited edition robe, giggling as she poured wine for Gavin. Oh, Mallory doesn't mind. Do you? She had chirped, leaning over Gavin so her hair brushed his shoulder. We are family. After all. I had smiled then, naive and trusting. Now, looking at the computer screen in his study, I saw the truth. I saw transfers of $50,000, then $100,000, moving from our joint savings into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account was registered to a shell company, but the beneficiary code was Tiana's birthday. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an automated fraud alert from the bank. This is a security verification, the operator's voice said when I answered. We have a flagged transaction on the Platinum card for $75,000 at Tiffany & Co. Was this authorized a diamond ring? He bought her a diamond ring with my credit card while I was stitching up my hand in a hospital. No, I said, my voice turning into ice. I did not authorize that charge. We will decline the transaction and freeze the card immediately. The operator confirmed. This may impact the credit score of the primary cardholder. Do it, I commanded. Let it decline. I hung up. For the first time in a decade, I was not going to fix his mess. I was going to let him drown in it. I did not go back to bed. Instead, I unlocked the fireproof safe hidden behind the painting of the Seattle skyline. My hands moved with purpose as I pulled out the dusty files containing the original intellectual property deeds. These were the documents proving that the core patents for Oronex's best-selling drugs belonged to the Blackwood Trust, not the public corporation. Gavin had built his empire on land he did not own. I laid the documents out on the desk, organizing the destruction of my husband's life, page by page. Our 10th wedding anniversary dinner was not a celebration of love, it was an execution. The candles were lit, casting long, flickering shadows across the dining table, but the man sitting opposite me was cold as stone. Gavin did not offer a toast. Instead, he slid a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany surface. It stopped right next to my untouched wine glass. I can't do this anymore. Mallory, Gavin said, swirling his scotch. We are incompatible. I looked at the envelope, feigning shock, though my heart was beating with the steady rhythm of a predator lying in wait. Incompatible. After 10 years, let's be honest, you are boring. Mal, you are just too safe, too tedious, he sneered, leaning back in his chair. I need someone who challenges me. Someone alive. He tapped the envelope. Inside lay a divorce settlement that was nothing short of robbery. He wanted the penthouse, the cars, and a significant portion of my liquid assets as spousal support for the years he claimed he sacrificed to run my family's company. And if I don't sign, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, playing the part of the crushed wife perfectly. Gavin's eyes narrowed. Then things get ugly. Everyone knows you have been fragile since your parents died. I would hate for the court to deem you mentally unstable and place you under a conservatorship. Imagine what that would do to the Blackwood name. The threat hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Before I could answer, the front door opened. Tiana breezed in, dragging 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases. She did not even knock. I'm here, she announced brightly, dropping her bags in the hallway. She walked over to us, placing a hand possessively on Gavin's shoulder. I told Gavin I should come stay for a while, to help you transition. Mallory, you know, poor cousin to poor cousin. It was a masterclass in cruelty. She was moving in before I had even moved out. You are right, I said, looking down at my lap to hide the gleam in my eyes. I can't stay here. The memories are too painful. I will go to grandmother's old villa in the suburbs. Gavin and Tiana exchanged a look of pure delight. They thought they had won. They thought they had exiled the sad, barren wife to a rotting house in the middle of nowhere so they could play house in my penthouse. That is for the best, Gavin said, quickly hiding his smirk. Take whatever you need. We will handle things here. 2 hours later, I stood in the driveway of the Blackwood estate. The Victorian mansion was overgrown with ivy, and the paint was peeling, but unlike the penthouse, it had a soul. As I stepped onto the porch, the heavy oak door creaked open. Standing there was Sebastian. He was in his 70s now, but his spine was as stiff as a steel rod. To the world, he was just an old family butler. To me, he was the former chief financial officer of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, the man who had taught me everything I knew about numbers. Welcome home, Miss Blackwood, Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. He did not call me Mrs. Vance. It is good to be back. Sebastian, I replied. Do we have the files in the library? he confirmed. As he poured me a cup of tea, his expression turned grave. It is worse than we thought. Mallory. Gavin is not just spending money. He is preparing to sell Orinex Bio to Vertex Corp. My blood ran cold. Vertex was our biggest rival, known for gutting companies and hiking drug prices. He wants a quick cash exit, Sebastian continued, placing a stack of documents on the table. He plans to sell the company for $200 million, pocket the payout, and leave the country with Miss Tiana before the shareholders realize the accounts are empty. He is embezzling, I realized, flipping through the pages. He is inflating the valuation with fake clinical trial data to secure the sale. It wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was corporate fraud. I spent the next week transforming the villa. I scrubbed the floors until my hands were raw, not out of necessity, but to scrub away the feeling of helplessness. I tied my hair back, traded my cardigans for practical work clothes, and reopened the dust-covered laboratory in the basement. I wasn't just a wife. I was a scientist. I was a Blackwood. I turned the library into a war room. The walls were soon covered in flowcharts, banking records, and timelines. I pinned up the photos of Tiana's new jewelry next to the withdrawal slips from the company accounts. He thinks I am crying in a dark room, I told Sebastian as I pinned a red string connecting Gavin to a shell company in Panama. He has severely underestimated you, Sebastian noted with a rare smile. He didn't just break my heart. Sebastian, I said, driving a pushpin into Gavin's picture. He tried to sell my legacy. Now, I am going to make sure he pays for it. Not with an apology, but with everything he owns. The private dining room of the Olympian Club smelled of old leather and cigar smoke, a scent that reminded me of my father. Seated around the long oak table were the 12 members of the Orinex Bio Board of Directors. To Gavin, they were just dinosaur relics, a group of senile old men he had to tolerate once a quarter. To me, they were Uncle Arthur, Uncle George, and the godfathers who had taught me how to play chess before I could read. I stood at the head of the table, projecting the clinical trial data onto the screen. As you can see, I said, my voice calm and authoritative, the efficacy rates for the new heart medication in Phase 3 were not 95%, as Gavin reported to the shareholders. They were barely 40%. He falsified the data points to artificially inflate the stock price before the proposed sale to Vertex. The room erupted in low, angry murmurs. These men valued integrity above profit. It was the Blackwood way. This is criminal, Arthur grumbled, slamming his hand on the table. He is turning the company into a Ponzi scheme. While I was dismantling Gavin's professional reputation, he was busy destroying his own financial future. My phone vibrated with a notification from a social media monitoring app I had installed. Tiana had just posted a photo on Instagram. It showed a nursery filled with designer baby gear, a solid gold crib, and piles of cashmere blankets. The caption read, "Finally building a home filled with love, not coldness. So grateful to be free of toxic people who don't understand the joy of family." I did not feel anger. I felt only a cold, strategic resolve. I closed the app and opened the digital copy of the Orinex corporate charter. I scrolled down to Article 7, Section C, a clause written in fine print that Gavin had been too arrogant to read thoroughly. It was the Founder's Clause. It stated clearly that the rights to all intellectual property and patents were licensed to the company, not sold, and that license was revocable immediately upon the CEO's filing for divorce from a direct Blackwood descendant or upon any act of moral turpitude. I sent the activation notice to the legal department. The effects were almost instant. By the next afternoon, the financial strangulation began. I was sitting in my library, cross-referencing bank statements, when my phone rang. It was Gavin. "What the hell did you do?" he screamed the moment I answered. My card was declined at the dealership I am trying to pick up the new Porsche, and they are looking at me like I am a pauper. "Hello, Gavin," I replied, taking a sip of tea. I imagine the credit card company is simply being cautious given the unusual spending patterns. Unusual spending? It is my money. He was hyperventilating now. And the joint trust fund. I tried to make a transfer to cover the down payment, and it says insufficient authorization. You need to sign the release. Mallory. Now I don't think I will. I said, You are trying to ruin me because you are jealous. He sputtered. Tiana needs things for the baby. You are so bitter because you couldn't give me one. Actually, Gavin, I am saving you from further debt, I said, my voice dropping to a chilly whisper. Since you are about to lose your job and your reputation, I suggest you stop buying Porsches and start saving for diapers. They are quite expensive. I hung up before he could respond. A moment later, the heavy library doors opened. Sebastian ushered in a tall man with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Gavin's car. It was Harrison Pierce. He was not just a lawyer, he was a legal shark who had represented the Blackwood family for 3 decades. He had been retired, but my call had brought him back. He placed a briefcase on the desk and looked at my evidence board. Mallory, Pierce said, his eyes gleaming with a predatory focus. I looked over the files you sent, the fraud, the embezzlement, the patent theft. It is extensive. How much will your retainer be? Mr. Pierce, I asked. He shook his head, a thin smile playing on his lips. For this no charge. Your grandfather was my best friend. Watching you take down that imposter will be payment enough. Now, shall we begin the slaughter? It turned out that Tiana's love for Gavin was directly correlated to his spending limit, according to the reports from the housekeeper, whom I was personally paying to stay loyal. The penthouse was no longer a love nest, but a war zone. Tiana was not handling the austerity measures well. She had apparently thrown a vase worth $2,000 because Gavin suggested she wear a dress twice. I am not going to the club looking like a pauper. Gavin, she had screamed, her voice carrying through the thin walls. You promised me the world. Not this budget nightmare. Gavin, meanwhile, was sweating. He needed cash, and he needed it fast. His brilliant solution was the future of Oranex Gala. It was a desperate attempt to dazzle potential buyers with smoke and mirrors before the company collapsed under the weight of his fraud. He called me on a Tuesday morning. Mallory, he said, his voice slick with false charm. I have a proposition. The gala is this Friday. I want you to come as the guest of honor. I almost laughed out loud. You want your soon-to-be ex-wife at your launch party. It is about optics, Mal, he explained condescendingly. If we look amicable, the stock stays stable. It benefits you too. If the sale goes through, there is more money for your settlement. Besides, I know you still care about the company. And maybe you miss me a little. The arrogance was breathtaking. He actually thought I was sitting at home pining for him, waiting for a crumb of attention. He thought I was coming to beg. I will be there. Gavin, I said, infusing my voice with a submissive softness. I would love to see what you have built. Perfect, he said, clearly relieved. Wear something nice, not your usual drab stuff. When Tiana found out, she went nuclear. The housekeeper told me she cornered Gavin in the kitchen. If that old hag is coming, then you need to announce our engagement on stage, Tiana demanded. I am the future Mrs. Vance. I will not be sidelined. I can't just... Not in front of the investors. Gavin stammered. Do it, Gavin, she shrieked. Or I walk, and I take the baby with me. While they bickered over spotlights and rings, Oranex Bio was bleeding. I saw the internal memos. Payroll was 3 days late. Suppliers for the lab reagents had put the company on a credit hold. The employees were whispering in the break rooms, sensing the ship was sinking. Yet, Gavin ignored the finance department's frantic emails. He was suffering from a god complex, convinced that one speech and a glass of champagne would solve bankruptcy. I had my own preparations to make. I met secretly with Dr. Thorne, the head of research and development, in a small coffee shop far from the office. Thorne was a brilliant scientist who had always hated Gavin's interference. "He wants me to present the new data at the gala," Thorne said, looking exhausted. "But Mallory, the data doesn't exist. The drug doesn't work." "I know," I said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "That is why we are going to present the real data. Are you with me?" Thorne took the drive. "For the sake of science. Miss Blackwood, I am with you." The night of the gala arrived. I stood before the full-length mirror in the master bedroom of my grandmother's villa. I looked at the woman in the reflection. She was no longer the invisible wife in beige cardigans. I had chosen a dress that was a declaration of war. It was crimson red, silk, and fitted to perfection, with a neckline that was daring and confident. It was the kind of dress that made people stop talking when you walked into a room. I looked at my left hand. The thin gold band Gavin had given me 10 years ago felt heavy, like a shackle. I slowly slid it off my finger and dropped it into the trash can. It made a hollow clink sound as it hit the bottom. In its place, I slid on the Blackwood signet ring. It was heavy, gold, and engraved with my family crest. It was a ring for a CEO, a ring for a ruler. Showtime, I whispered to the empty room. The lobby of the Oronex Tower had been transformed into a palace of desperation. It was clear that Gavin had spent a fortune on this gala, likely using money we did not have. There were towering arrangements of white orchids that must have cost thousands of dollars, a string quartet playing in the corner, and a champagne fountain that flowed with vintage bubbly. It was too much. It was the frantic display of a man trying to convince the world, and perhaps himself, that he was a king, even as his castle crumbled around him. I arrived 15 minutes late by design. When I stepped out of the hired limousine and walked through the revolving glass doors, the chatter in the room seemed to die down instantly. I was not wearing the beige, sensible suits Gavin had always insisted I wear to these functions. Tonight, I was wearing the red silk dress. It was a violent, unapologetic shade of crimson, tailored to fit me like a second skin, with a slit that showed just enough leg to be dangerous. I held my head high, my shoulders back, radiating the kind of cold, untouchable power that only comes when you have nothing left to lose. I saw Gavin across the room. He was holding a crystal flute, laughing too loudly at a joke made by a potential investor. When his eyes landed on me, he stopped mid-laugh. His jaw went slack. For a moment, he looked like he had seen a ghost. But I was not a ghost. I was the reality he had tried to erase. Recovering his composure with difficulty, he whispered something to Tiana and pulled her toward me. Tiana was draped in a diamond necklace that was far too flashy to be real. I recognized the style from a high-end rental catalog. She saw the way people were looking at me, and her eyes narrowed into slits of jealousy. She immediately placed both hands on her stomach, thrusting her hips forward to emphasize a baby bump that was barely there. "Mallory," Gavin said, his voice cracking slightly. You look incredible." "Thank you, Gavin," I said, my voice smooth and cool like glass. "We are so glad you could make it." "Cousin," Tiana chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It is so big of you to be here to support Gavin and our growing family. I know it must be hard. For you." She patted her stomach again, a cruel, deliberate gesture. I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space just enough to make her uncomfortable. I smiled, but the smile did not reach my eyes. I leaned in, bringing my lips close to her ear so only she could hear. "Be careful with the pregnancy. Tiana, stress is not good for the baby," I whispered. Tiana stiffened, a flicker of genuine fear crossing her face. She pulled back, looking at the room with uncertainty, but I had already turned my attention to the room. The vultures were circling. A group of major investors had cornered Gavin near the buffet. I watched as Mr. Henderson, A man who controlled a hedge fund worth billions started grilling Gavin. The intellectual property filings for the new cardiac drug are complex. Gavin, Henderson said, his tone sharp. I noticed the patent numbers on the prospectus don't match the public registry. Can you explain the discrepancy? Gavin paled. He did not know the answer because he had never bothered to learn the details of the business he pretended to run. He looked around wildly, his eyes locking on mine. It was a silent, desperate plea. Help me, Mal. Step in and explain the science. Save me. In the past, I would have rushed over, charming the investors with my technical knowledge, covering for his incompetence. Tonight, I simply raised my glass of wine in a mock toast to him, turned my back, and started a lively conversation with the CEO of Vertex, our biggest competitor. Gavin was on his own. The lights in the hall dimmed, signaling the start of the presentation. A massive screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a glossy, overproduced video of Gavin walking through a laboratory, looking serious and visionary. It was all staged. I glanced toward the VIP section. Harrison Pierce and Sebastian were seated at a small table in the shadows. They were not drinking or eating. They sat perfectly still, watching Gavin with the intensity of two eagles waiting for a rabbit to break cover. Sebastian caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Gavin walked up the steps to the stage, the spotlight following him. He adjusted his microphone, flashing his signature charming smile to the crowd, though I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners, Gavin began, his voice booming through the speakers. Tonight is about the future. It is about legacy. Orinex is not just a company. It is a family. And speaking of family, he paused for dramatic effect, looking toward Tiana, who was beaming in the front row. I have a very special announcement tonight, Gavin continued, his confidence returning as he stuck to the script he thought he controlled. I want to introduce you to the woman who represents the new chapter of my life. He was about to introduce his mistress and his illegitimate child to the world on my dime. I took a sip of wine, savoring the taste. He had no idea that the script was about to change. And now, please welcome the mother of my child, the future of this family, Gavin began, sweeping his arm dramatically toward the front row where Tiana sat. Before Tiana could stand, a high-pitched screech of audio feedback tore through the room, making everyone wince. The massive screen behind Gavin flickered violently. The glossy photo of Gavin's smiling face vanished instantly. In its place, the ancient, imposing crest of the Blackwood family appeared, stark black against a white background. It was the logo my grandfather had designed 50 years ago. Below it, in bold, unforgiving letters, the text read, Mallory Blackwood, Vance Chairwoman and CEO. The silence in the room was deafening. I walked up the stairs to the stage, the rhythmic clicking of my heels the only sound in the vast hall. Gavin stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I reached out and firmly took the microphone from his limp hand. I will take it from here. Gavin, I said, my voice amplified and echoing through the stunned crowd. Mallory. What are you doing? Gavin hissed, stepping back as if I were holding a weapon. You are ruining everything. No. Gavin, I am fixing it, I replied coldly. I turned to the tech booth, where my loyal IT director gave me a thumbs up. Show them the financials. I clicked the presenter remote. The screen changed again. This time, it displayed a series of wire transfer receipts. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the room, my voice steady and commanding. What you have been told tonight is a fantasy. This is the reality. These documents show unauthorized transfers totaling $3.5 million from Orinex research funds into private offshore accounts registered to a shell company. A shell company that lists Tiana Miller as the primary beneficiary. A gasp rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed rapidly, blinding in their intensity. And this, I continued, Clicking the remote again to show a graph that flatlined near 0 is the actual clinical data for the heart medication. It is not 95% effective. It is 30% effective. Gavin falsified the results to inflate the stock price before a sale. The room erupted into chaos. Investors were shouting, demanding answers. Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to have a stroke. Suddenly, Tiana scrambled up the stairs, her face twisted in panic and rage. She grabbed Gavin's arm and pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is lying," Tiana screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "She is just jealous. She is a bitter, barren woman who can't stand that I am giving Gavin the family he always wanted. How dare you attack a pregnant woman? You are evil." She clutched her stomach theatrically, trying to summon tears. "My baby. You are hurting my baby with your lies." I looked at her with an expression of pure pity. "Security," I said into the microphone. "Play the second video." The screen shifted once more. It was grainy footage from a security camera, but the audio was crystal clear. It was not the hospital room. It was the hallway of a private clinic from 2 weeks ago. Tiana was pacing, holding her phone to her ear. "Gavin is such an idiot." Tiana's voice rang out from the speakers, dripping with mockery. "He actually believes it is his." I told him the timeline matches. "But it doesn't. It is Mike's, the gym trainer. But who cares? Gavin has the money. Once I get the ring, I am set for life." The video ended. Tiana froze, her face draining of all color. The entire room turned to look at her. Gavin slowly turned his head to look at the woman he was about to introduce as his future. His eyes were wide, filled with a horror that was almost painful to watch. It is fake," Tiana stammered, backing away. "Gavin, baby." She used AI. She faked it. She didn't fake it. "Gavin," I said, delivering the final blow. I looked directly at my husband. "Do you remember the testosterone supplements you have been taking for the last 3 years to build muscle? The ones you ordered from overseas, Gavin choked out. "I saw your medical file from the urologist last month," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone still caught perfectly. "You have secondary infertility." "Gavin, you have been sterile for over 2 years. Medically, it is impossible for you to be that child's father." The microphone dropped from my hand, landing with a heavy thud. Gavin looked at Tiana. He looked at the belly she was clutching. Then he looked at me, the wife he had called boring, the woman he had underestimated, the billionaire he had thrown away. His knees gave out. He collapsed right there on the stage, sobbing into his hands, a broken man surrounded by the ruins of his own ego. The silence that followed Gavin's collapse was short-lived, replaced instantly by a feral intensity. He scrambled to his knees, turning his gaze toward Tiana. It was not the look of a lover. It was the look of a man drowning who realized his life vest was made of lead. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, manic with a mixture of disbelief and fury. You knew Gavin hissed, his voice cracking. You let me humiliate myself. Is it true?" Tiana did not answer. She stumbled backward, her high heels clicking unevenly on the stage floor, her hands shielding her face as if she expected a physical blow. Her silence was louder than any confession she could have made. Before Gavin could lunge at her, the double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a resounding crash. A squad of uniformed officers marched in, their faces grim and purposeful. Beside them walked a federal agent holding a folded document. I looked over at the VIP table where Harrison Pierce sat. He raised his glass of water in a subtle salute. He had timed this perfectly. "Gavin Vance," the lead agent announced, his voice booming over the commotion. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny." Gavin scrambled to stand up, looking wildly for an exit, but there was nowhere to run. 2 officers ascended the stairs and grabbed his arms, wrenching them behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the microphone that was still lying on the floor near his feet. No, no. This is a mistake, Gavin screamed, struggling uselessly. My wife. Ask my wife, Mallory. Tell them he looked up at me, his eyes pleading, sweat dripping down his face. I stood motionless, looking down at him with the detachment of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I have no husband, I said clearly, my voice cold enough to freeze the room. I only see a criminal who stole from my family. While Gavin was being restrained, Tiana seized the opportunity to try and slink away toward the backstage exit. She kept her head down, trying to make herself invisible, but she didn't make it far. A large, burly man in a tuxedo, one of the private lenders Gavin had borrowed from when the banks cut him off, stepped out from the shadows of the wings and blocked her path. "Not so fast, sweetheart," the man growled. "Mr. Vance put that diamond necklace up as collateral for his last loan. He said it was yours. So now, it is mine." He reached out and unclasped the necklace from her neck with rough efficiency. Tiana shrieked, clutching her throat, but no one moved to help her. I picked up the microphone again, ignoring the chaos unfolding around the two traders. I turned to the stunned audience of shareholders, employees, and press. "I apologize for the disruption," I said, my tone shifting to one of professional reassurance. "Effective immediately. Oranex Bio is restructuring. We are stripping away the vanity projects. We are canceling the sale to Vertex. We are returning to the mission my grandfather started 50 years ago. We are here to save lives, not to fund a lifestyle." A ripple of applause started from the back, the employees, the scientists, the people who had not been paid in weeks, and soon it grew into a thunderous ovation. Gavin was being dragged down the stairs now. She set me up. "She is crazy," he yelled, spitting the words out. "Mallory, I will kill you." The crowd recoiled from him. Investors looked at him with open disgust. Phones were raised high, recording every second of his disgrace. On the large screen behind me, the live stream comments from social media were scrolling by so fast they were a blur. The internet had turned on Tiana instantly. "Look at her dress. It is a knockoff," one comment read. "She faked a pregnancy for clout. That is sick," read another. "Gold digger got dug." A third one mocked. Tiana saw the comments on a monitor near the stage edge. She covered her ears and screamed, a shrill sound of pure narcissistic injury. "Get her out of here." I ordered the head of security, pointing a sharp finger at my cousin, "and check her bags. She leaves with nothing. No company phone, no company car. She walks out of here exactly as she came into my life with nothing." Security guards flanked Tiana, gripping her arms and marching her toward the exit. She was sobbing now, not for forgiveness, but for the loss of her humiliating public image. The ballroom was a scene of beautiful chaos. The old regime was being hauled away in handcuffs and tears, while the new order stood firm on the stage. I felt a lightness in my chest I had not felt in a decade. I walked down the stairs, the crowd parting for me with newfound respect. I moved toward the exit, my path taking me directly past Gavin as the officers paused to adjust his restraints. He looked at me, broken, humiliated, and small. I stopped for a brief second. I leaned in close, so only he could hear me over the noise of the flashing cameras. "You always wanted to be the center of attention." "Gavin," I whispered, a small, satisfied smile playing on my lips. "Enjoy it." The corner office on the 45th floor no longer felt like a mausoleum of male ego. I had stripped away the black leather furniture and the cold chrome statues that Gavin loved so much. The space was now filled with warm oak, soft cream textiles, and natural light that flooded in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It finally felt like a place where life-saving medicine was created, not a place where deals were made in the shadows. I glanced at the newspaper on my desk. The headline was bold and unforgiving, Disgraced CEO faces 20 years for massive fraud scheme. Gavin's trial was the talk of Seattle. The federal prosecutors were not being lenient. They had uncovered layers of embezzlement that went back 5 years. As for Tiana, the internet had been less kind to her than the law. She had been shamed out of the city, retreating to her parents' small farm in the middle of nowhere, followed by a cloud of scandal that would likely never lift. She was a social pariah, isolated and ignored. I took a sip of jasmine tea and looked at the organizational chart on my tablet. Dr. Thorne is settling in well as the new chief scientific officer. I noted aloud to myself. I had spent the last 4 weeks purging the company. Every executive who had turned a blind eye to Gavin's theft was fired. In their place, I promoted the quiet, hardworking scientists and managers who actually cared about our mission. The rot was gone. My phone buzzed with a notification from my real estate agent. The sale of the penthouse had closed this morning. I had sold it for $12 million. I did not keep a penny of it. Instead, I wired the entire sum to a new trust I had established, the Blackwood Fund for Women Entrepreneurs. It felt poetic to use the proceeds of Gavin's vanity to build power for women he would have underestimated. The door opened softly, and Sebastian walked in carrying a silver tray. "Your afternoon tea, Miss Mallory," he said, placing the cup down with his usual precision. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes softening. "If I may say so, your grandfather would be very proud of you today. You have restored the honor of this house." "Thank you." "Sebastian," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "I think he would be glad we are finally back to work." Sebastian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. It had the stamp of the county correctional facility on it. "This arrived for you," he said, his tone turning distasteful. "From the prison." I took the letter. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. I did not need to open it to know what it said. I could almost hear Gavin's voice in my head, whining and manipulative. "Mallory, please. I have no one else. I need a lawyer. I still love you." I did not even reach for the letter opener. I walked over to the heavy-duty shredder in the corner of the room. I fed the envelope into the machine unopened. The sharp, grinding noise of the blades tearing through the paper was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. Trash taken out. I murmured. Later that evening, I attended a charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. I was walking through the garden, enjoying the cool evening air, when a woman approached me. She looked familiar, though out of uniform. "Mrs. Vance?" she asked tentatively. I turned and recognized her immediately. It was the nurse from St. Jude, the one who had asked the question that changed my life. "It is Ms. Blackwood now," I corrected her gently with a smile. "Oh, right. Ms. Blackwood," she stammered, looking embarrassed. I wanted to apologize. I saw the news. I realized that when I asked if he was the father that day at the hospital, I caused you a lot of pain. I am so sorry." I reached out and touched her arm reassuringly. "Do not apologize," I told her honestly. "That question saved my life. If you hadn't asked it, I might still be living a lie. You gave me the truth, and for that, I am grateful." She smiled, relieved, and walked away. I stood there alone among the roses, thinking about the baby that never was. For years, I had wept over my empty womb. I had felt like a failure because I could not give Gavin a child. But now, standing in the moonlight, free and powerful, I realized the truth. It wasn't a curse. It was a divine intervention. If I had a child with Gavin, I would be tied to him forever. I would have to see his face in my son or daughter every day. "Thank God," I whispered to the night sky. I turned back toward the lights of the party. Tomorrow, I was breaking ground on a new laboratory wing. It would be dedicated to my grandmother, and it would focus exclusively on women's reproductive health. I was done looking back. The future was waiting. and it was mine to write. The wooden gavel struck the sound block with a decisive crack that echoed through the high-ceilinged courtroom. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on the darkest decade of my life. Judgment is entered in favor of the plaintiff. Mallory Blackwood, the judge declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. The defendant, Gavin Vance, is ordered to assume full liability for all personal debts incurred during the marriage. All assets, including the Blackwood estate and shares in Orinex Bio, remain the sole property of the plaintiff. Court is adjourned. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my white blazer. Across the aisle, Gavin slumped in his chair. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in a single month. His designer suit hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogant spark that used to define his eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, hollow defeat. Tiana was nowhere to be seen. Her lawyer had informed the court that she was indisposed, presumably hiding in obscurity on her parents' farm, too ashamed to face the cameras or the consequences. As the bailiff moved to escort him out, Gavin turned toward me. He stopped, ignoring his lawyer's gesture to keep moving. "Mallory," he rasped, his voice rough. I know I messed up, but you have to believe me. In the beginning, I did love you." I looked at him, searching for any flicker of emotion in my own chest. I waited for the anger, the sadness, or even the pity, but there was nothing. He was just a stranger with a familiar face. "No, Gavin," I replied, my voice calm and clear. "You never loved me. You loved the pedestal I built for you. You loved the money, the access, and the title I let you have. You loved the platform I provided, and you destroyed it with your own hands." I did not wait for his response. I turned on my heel and walked down the center aisle, pushing through the heavy double doors into the bright afternoon light. The steps of the courthouse were swarming with reporters. Microphones were thrust in my direction, and voices shouted over one another, asking about Gavin's sentence and the scandal. I ignored them all, walking through the crowd with the grace of a woman who no longer needed to explain herself to anyone. At the curb, a sleek silver sports car pulled up. The window rolled down to reveal Julian, a brilliant neuroscientist I had recently partnered with for the new Women's Health Initiative. He was not my driver, he was my equal. He did not get out to open the door for me because he knew I was capable of doing it myself, but he offered a respectful nod as I slid into the passenger seat. "Ready to go, partner?" Julian asked, smiling. "The board is waiting for your presentation on the new research facility. In a moment," I said. I looked back at the gray stone building of the courthouse one last time. It felt as though 1,000 pounds of weight had vanished from my shoulders. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I scrolled to the contacts list. Gavin Vance, Tiana Miller. I pressed delete. Then I went to the blocked numbers list and cleared the history. They were gone, not just from my life, but from my digital existence. They were ghosts of a past that no longer defined me. I realized then that the best revenge was not watching Gavin go to prison, though that was justice. The best revenge was not Tiana's humiliation. The best revenge was letting them watch me from the bottom of the pit they dug for themselves, while I stood somewhere they could never reach. I was radiant. I was successful. And most importantly, I was free. "Let's go," I said to Julian. As the car engine roared to life and we merged into the traffic, I smiled. It was a real smile, reaching all the way to my eyes. I left the dust of the past behind me, accelerating toward a future that was entirely, undeniably mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Mallory's revenge. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.